This is the Authority Company Podcast, conversations with leaders that are designing our future. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and I've got Lisa Wolfe on the show today. Lisa has been on an incredible run. She has 40 years of corporate experience, and now she's the author of the Amazon bestseller and Barnes & Noble bestseller, Inner Fire. The book is a powerful and impactful guide for all of us navigating the stresses of the corporate world. We're going to get into that. We're going to also talk about what a spirit keeper is and what we can all do to avoid burnout in 2025. Lisa Wolfe, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good. It's so great to be here and so nice to meet you, Joe.
Nice to meet you, Lisa. So I want to start with talking about the root of your book, Inner Fire, and that's about corporate burnout, because I feel like, as you know from writing this book and being involved in technology most of your life, is just there's a fine line between giving it the old 100% college try, the burnout, and then also just doing the bare minimum. And the reason I bring this up is like, I feel like we've evolved into this culture where people are probably getting more burnt out, but they're a lot more intentional when it comes to when they stop working. And me being an old school Gen Xer, Lisa, like if I'm in the middle of a project and it's 5 o'clock, I'm going to continue working until I'm done with it that day. And then there's this other part of the culture where it's like, 5 o'clock, I might be in the middle of this. It could be heart surgery. It's not, but it could be something very complicated. But I'm going to wait till tomorrow at 9 a.m. to pick this up. And then a part of in between all that are people that are suffering from corporate burnout. So tell me about this sort of like gray area that exists of like being able to be a high performer without burning out.
Yeah, I think it's a very fine line, and I've always been on the hairy edge of burnout because I've always given it my all, and I started in tech as a computer scientist 40 years ago. So I've been in these really intense situations where you do have to give it your all, but only you know when your plate's overfull. Only you know when you're on the edge of burnout. And sometimes people don't know. And it's their health that hits them hard with a heart attack or a nervous breakdown. But the younger generation today, where they stop, as you say, where they're stopping at 5 and saying, okay, well, I'm going to get to this at 9 in the morning. I think that is probably an extreme. I know that happens, but I admire people that know when they're crossing that line and they're moving into burnout and they actually set boundaries. In my days, people didn't set boundaries. There were a lot of people working 24/7, and their whole identity was their job. They had nothing else outside their job. Those are the people who burn out, and jobs go away. So jobs go away. You see it happening every day. And when your whole identity is your job, it's like a death. So building your identity outside of your work and outside of your job acts as a buffer for when you're in between jobs. And you have to drive that. You have to learn that. It's not as easy as, okay, it's 5 o'clock and I'm out of here. It's more, you're still giving it your all, but you're also paying attention to the fact that there's life outside of the corporate doors that you're working in.
Yeah, that's good. It's funny too, because one of the frustrations I have with a lot of and I don't want to be like this old man shouting at the clouds Scott thing, but it's the idea of knowing when you need to push that boundary. Because I had this an incident with a coworker a while back where they were tasked with doing something that I was working on, and they screwed up. They knew it. But instead of being like, "Hey, I'm going to work till this screw up is fixed," they were like, "Okay, cool, I'll get to it when I'm able to." And to me, as someone who's like, I would not be able to sleep at night if I screwed something up. I wouldn't be able to go to bed that night unless I fixed that thing that I was responsible for. So I think for me personally, that's always I totally I'm very sympathetic to people's needs and avoiding burnout. But I think there's some times where these boundaries should not be so rigid, and they should have like a little flex, like like a little. They should bend just a little bit to make sure that you are treating your kind of teammates and people around you with the respect that they deserve.
Yeah, I mean, the number one thing that I found in my 40 years working in tech, the number one thing is the team. It's the team that you work with. And how you can rely on each other. I mean, you want to be that person, you want to be known as that person that you're going to get things done. Somebody asks you to do something, you're going to get it done. If you screw up, you're going to fix it. So that is not related to burnout as much as it's related to building your integrity and your trust with the team. That does have to do with, are you going to be successful in the corporate environment? Because if you're not building those teaming relationships and being the person that can be counted on, then you're going to have a tough time. But taking responsibility and owning and fixing screw ups, that's different than I'm only going to work 9 to 5. That's a whole nother level of responsibility. And that doesn't mean that sometimes you're not going to be working weekends or working on something 7 by 24. That doesn't mean that that doesn't exist. It just means that you have to make sure, because nobody's paying attention to this, that you recognize when you're crossing the line, the red line of burnout, the red line of stress. When are you crossing that line? Nobody's going to tell you that. Only you know that. And that comes from your body's signals. But if you get so focused on your 24/7 work, you lose track of your body's signals telling you, hey, you're there. You need to have this discussion on what you can take off your plate.
Well, let's get into it. Like, what are some of those early signs of burnout? I mean, I may have experienced it, but I'm so oblivious and that maybe I was burnt out and didn't know. What I mean, maybe it's something personal, but what do you see as some of those early signs when it comes to burnout?
I think it's when you're overly fatigued. I mean, tired goes with the tired goes day in day out. Everybody gets tired, but I think when you're overly fatigued, when you're starting to get easily frustrated with your team or with your team members or with your family, and you have to be checking in on yourself. And you can feel that stress. That's when you have to stop, and that's when you have to say, pull back and take a break. Because there's really nothing more important than your health, and you don't want your health to show up and knock on your door. And oftentimes, people that aren't paying attention again to have they crossed their red line of stress, it shows up in their health. I worked with a production leader at Hewlett-Packard many years ago, and she worked 7 by 24. She worked 7 by 24 for years. Her sole identity was her work. And then one day, in front of hundreds of employees, her knees buckled out from under her, and she ran straight into burnout. And her doctor said, you need to find another job. You need to find a job that has a lot less stress. But what I say about stress is stress can be a great thing. Stress can be a source of energy. It can be a source of power until we cross our own red line of stress. And we're the only ones that know when we cross that line. So you have to check in. Are you overly fatigued? Are you creating more issues because you've crossed that line of burnout with your family, with your team? Check in on yourself and then take that break. And again, there's nothing more urgent than health. You lose health, you lose everything.
I love that. I love that. All right. So in the book, Inner Fire, you talk about spirit keepers. First, tell me how you first identified the idea of that and what it means to be a spirit keeper.
Yeah, so very early on in my career, I had a family member who was tragically paralyzed. And my family spent many, many weekends in the paralysis ward of the hospital with my family member and others who were tragically paralyzed. And as I go into the workplace during the week, I started to notice my peers burning out. And it was almost as if spending my weekends with people who had become physically paralyzed, when I went back into the workplace during the week, I could see people's spirits becoming paralyzed. And I saw this by the way they physically slumped over, or they lost their energy and their voice. They sort of pulled back. They were only going through the motions. And then I recognized there were a few people that actually weren't getting hit by burnout. They were keeping their energy really strong. And I said, I want to learn from those people. I want to learn from them. I want to capture those lessons. And those are the lessons that I captured and I included in the book, Inner Fire. That's how I came to it. And I called those people that kept their energy really strong, I called them spirit keepers. And I also call myself a spirit keeper. Although I do, again, want to say I've always been on that hairy edge of burnout. So I've always had to constantly be checking in. Um, because I'm like you, right? Oh, if it needs to, the job needs 7 by 24, I'm all in 7 by 24. So I have to keep checking in and creating those boundaries as well.
So what are some of the tips you give to people? Because we talk about this, the red line, this always on culture, because we don't go anywhere without our mobile phones. And on said mobile phone is usually our work email. Our phone number is usually the same number. And remember at least remember back in the day when you had a work number? Nope, nope, nope. Your work number is now your home mobile phone. So what kind of advice do you give to people to, again, show that you're 100% all in during those work hours, but the boundaries when it comes, like, because I guess a way to phrase this is like, so what are you able to respond to and not respond to? Like, if an emergency message comes at 8 o'clock on a Friday night, do you ignore it till Monday because that's the boundary? So tell me about this.
So lots of questions there.
I know.
I'll start. Yeah. Let me start with. Let me start with the phone. So yeah, I spent half my career without there weren't mobile phones, so I remember those days well. And it's like any practice when it comes to the phone. And I know this is hard for people to hear because most people, the phone is just an appendage. But it's like a practice. And I had the opportunity to speak with students that are just graduated from Yale and Cornell Tech this last month. And I was having this same discussion with them that as you go out and you enter these corporations that you're going to be working for, one of the first things you want to do is establish time in your mornings and in your afternoons that are locked out for deep work. Like, this is your deep work time. It's uninterruptible. Notifications are off. And you want to establish that time, even if this sounds like not much time, but even if a minimum of 30 minutes in the morning and 30 minutes in the afternoon where you're not interrupted. Because if you don't do that, your phone is always on. I mean, if you're not doing that, you're going to be doing your deep work at night, and that's an easy habit to get into right when you start your career, or even now. It's an easy habit to get into. So you have to be really disciplined, and this is the part that people have a hard time with. Disciplined and when you're going to get your deep work done, and you have to share that with your team. Hey, I am blocking this time in the afternoons for getting these projects done. And your phone, wherever it needs to go, in the drawer, out of sight. The phone has unfortunately hijacked a lot of our focus. And my whole experience and the set of skills that you need to be successful in a corporation and in tech is focus. And focus is that skill that has been zapped by the phone. So the more discipline you can put around blocking the time that you need without the phone, the better off that you're going to be. When it comes to things like you mentioned, an urgent request comes in at 8 on a Friday night. I recently was in a meeting before I actually left my last role where the team was working on a project that took us over the weekend. And it was due Monday morning, and we were going to work the whole weekend. And one of the people on the team said, I have a personal policy. I don't work weekends. And I had never heard that before. And I thought, that's awesome. That is teaching the rest of us how to establish boundaries. And the person is a high achiever. They work as hard as anyone else, but they're teaching others how to establish boundaries and where it's okay to establish boundaries. So again, only you can decide when you're crossing that red line, if you already have too much on your plate and you're getting another project, because corporations will give you as much as you'll take. So usually you're early in your career or even later in your career, you'll just take whatever new initiatives or projects are coming. So, key question, and I shared this with the students at Yale and Cornell Tech. I said, hey, always keep this in mind. If you're being asked to take on a new initiative, the question back is, which of the initiatives that I'm working on or my team's working on should come off our plate to add this new initiative. That should always be a conversation throughout your career because, again, it just keeps coming. It never stops.
That's good. I often write and talk about, Lisa, the busy culture. Like we have, as Americans, have sort of now used busyness as like this ultimate shield. Like if someone says, "Hey, can you do this for me?" and they say, "Oh, I'm busy," immediately, like, "Oh God, this person is busy." So it's almost like this shield that we all carry that, and we all understand it. Like if someone just lays that four-letter word, it's like, "Oh, end of conversation." And I feel, Lisa, that the problem is not that we're all busy, we're just all terrible at time management. Like, I know people that have meeting after meeting back to back, like 6 or 7 in a day. I'm like, how are you able to accomplish anything when you're in meetings? You can't, I mean, meetings should be meant for like working things out, fixing problems. But this idea of like meetings taking up time in your calendar, then making you so busy that you can't actually think. Tell me about this current state of the culture in how we're managing our time.
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, this is overused and you've heard it many times where, no is a complete sentence. But again, what I said early on is the most successful people that I have seen in corporations are those that establish that really strong teamwork and they can be relied on. And the "I'm busy" doesn't ever show up in that kind of conversation. It's more of, "You've done a really good job knowing what your priorities are." Like, instead of, "I have a fire drill, I have a fire drill, I have a fire drill," it's, "I have a priority. I'm gonna get to this. I'm gonna get it done. This is where I can fit it in." And when it comes to meetings, I said this earlier, if you don't block out that time in the morning and in the afternoon for deep work, you are just gonna be in meetings. Your days are just gonna be meetings and unscheduled interruptions with the phone. So that's that practice and that skill of building focus and carving that time out. I also see some people, they're proud they're busy. They're busy 24. It could be a U.S. culture thing. I'm not sure, but busyness is almost, a badge to wear, and I think that we do ourselves a disservice and getting outside, no matter where you are, if you're in, downtown New York or if you're on a little beach somewhere, wherever you're located, um, just getting outside, even for 30 minutes to breathe and getting in nature without your phone, that's like a whole infusion of energy. When I talk about protecting your spirit from corporate burnout, I'm talking about protecting your energy and protecting your vitality. Your inner energy. How are you protecting it? If you're in meetings 7 by 24, you're depleting all of your energy. You're closing in on burnout. You want to make sure that you're in control of your schedule and at the same time that you are the person that can be relied on to get things done. That's a balance of prioritization, constant prioritization and reprioritization. But you can't just keep taking everything on the plate because like I said, corporations will give you as much as you'll take, and it never stops coming unless you're constantly having that negotiation with your leadership team and with your team.
That's great. And what can leaders do to be spirit nurturers? Because, um, we always hear this thing about work-life balance, and people argue whether that exists. But I remember when I first started with a new company, they were like, "Hey, we prioritize work-life balance." And I'm like, "Okay, cool." Like me being old school, I'm like, "Yeah, that's fine, that's fine." And they say, everyone basically at 5 o'clock will go home. And I remember my first week on the job, Lisa, I was working on a project. I was editing something, and it was like getting to 5, and I'm like, I'll just, it's gonna take me another 15 minutes. Let me knock this out and I'll be done. I finish it. I'm so like, I'm so ingrained in my ways. I'm just looking down at my screen, editing something. And then when I'm done, I go turn around and go into the office. The lights are off. Like everyone has gone at 5:15. And I was like, oh, this is what they mean by work-life balance. And so to my question about it starts from the top, I think that's one of the steps to show people that, hey, you don't have to be killing yourself past the 8 hour threshold because the boss is going to leave at 5 o'clock. So you can too. What are other ways that that bosses and leaders can sort of nurture this sort of environment that we've been talking about?
Yeah, first let me say how fortunate you are that you work for a company where they actually turned off the lights at 5. I think being in tech, I have actually never experienced that in my 40 years in tech. Um, it's probably more common that you'll work for different leaders, different types of leaders, and every one of those leaders will have a different prioritization on work-life integration or work-life balance, and you'll still have to own it. You as an individual will still have to own it. You can work for someone that does work 7 by 24, doesn't have a sense of work-life balance, is not important to them, and just the opposite, the leadership that you described. And you still have to own your own boundaries because it's your health and it's your energy that you need to preserve. It's great if you've got leaders that are role modeling, not working on the weekends or not working 7 by 24. I think, one of the things and that could help, and I don't talk about this in the book, but you brought it up. I think one of the things is leader, instead of everything being urgent, is for leaders before they say, here's a new priority, here's an urgent priority, or here's a fire drill, that before they even have that conversation with the extended teams, that they help to prioritize. They have the conversation of when they're meeting with their teams. Hey, Joe, how's it going? How's your workload? What can I take off your plate? That's the first conversation leaders should think about having to really ingrain into the culture work-life integration or boundaries and helping people keep their energy. Because again, like I said earlier, only you know when you've crossed that red line of stress. Only you know when you have too much on your plate. Your leadership team might not know that. I know a senior leader who shared with me that her team was recently asked to take on a big new project. And she said, no, our plate is full. And her leader said, thank you for sharing that with me. I had no idea. So also, employees can't assume that their leaders know, that their plate is over full. So it's an ongoing negotiation and a conversation. But I don't think it looks like, because I think it's a perfect world where you're coming in at 9 and leaving at 5. It's just sort of not how work flows. I do think it looks like that you have that conversation early on with your leadership team, or the leader has that conversation with their teams that this is important. We really want to make sure your health and your energy is number one, and not even talk about it in terms of burnout, but we want to make sure that you're having the right breaks and that we're having the right discussions around prioritization, and help you understand that not everything is a fire drill, because when everything is a fire drill, then nothing is important. But it's an ongoing conversation. And sometimes because of the leaders that you're working for, if they're not prioritizing it, you still have to prioritize it.
Hmm. And as we know, sometimes nothing is easy. And in the book, Inner Fire, you talk about the be water mindset. Let's talk about that and how it helps in terms of these obstacles that we all inevitably run into.
Yeah. So the be water mindset it's a philosophy that I adopted very early in my career. That when you run into an obstacle, that you are water. So we have to be water. And what I mean by that is there's always going to be obstacles. Sometimes they're lack of resources. Sometimes somebody says, no, you can't move that forward. Sometimes it's people. And water is the most powerful compound in the universe, and water will just keep flowing and finding a way. And I use an example in the book. This is a real example of a colleague that I worked with at Hewlett-Packard. Very early on, he was responsible for sales tools. And he was asked to bring in a sales tool that was really buggy. It wasn't ready for prime time, and get the sales team to adopt that. And the sales team, they were mandated to use this sales tool that just frankly didn't work. And there was a rumor at the time that the reason that we brought it in to the company is that the decision maker for that tool was a tennis partner with a decision maker of the company that actually created that software. So, rumor. Um, Anyway, sales reps were so frustrated they had to use this buggy tool. And he came to me, my colleague came to me and said, "What should I do?" And I said, "You need to be water." And he said, "What?" And I said, "You are water. You just need to move around all the obstacles that are in your way," because he had found a better sales tool, a superior sales tool. It worked. And he was starting to show it to sales teams that loved it. And I said, "Just keep going. Show that sales tool to every sales team you can show it to, and have the sales organization turn around and say, 'This is the tool that we need.'" And he did that. And somebody else might have not taken it forward, but he not only adopted that philosophy that he was water and could keep moving around obstacles and finding a way, but he applied it for the rest of his career and also to his life. So it's something that I've used throughout my career, that whenever there's an obstacle in the way, just keep finding a way to keep moving the project or the initiative forward instead of just stopping. It's a really helpful mindset to establish, and it helps kind of build inner resilience as well, along the way.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that story. That's awesome. You kind of touched upon it earlier about how people's identities are so tied into their work, and I'm 100% guilty of this. I write and talk about this a lot. I think it's especially like for Gen X and Boomers, and maybe probably a little older millennials. It's like they are who their job is. Like I always joke that I worked in a radio station for 24 years, and I was Joe Partiville from WPLJ. Like it was literally like almost like my hyphenated last name. It was who I was. And then one day the radio station got sold and blown up, and I was no longer that person. And so there was that struggle to identify. And one thing I respect and I'm enamored by younger people, whether it's the younger millennials or even Gen Alpha, Gen Y, is the idea of they are not what their job is. So what kind of advice do you give to people who are probably still stuck in that sort of mindset of I am what I do for a living, not I am blank, blank, blank? And any tips? Because I know there's something you do talk about a bunch and write about. So how could people, work their way through that?
Yeah, I referenced this one colleague earlier, the one that actually was a production leader at HP, and she did burn out. She was working 7 by 24. She was her job. When she wasn't at work, she was talking about work. She didn't really have anything else. And after she had run into burnout, and her doctor told her she needed to find a different job with less stress. After she ran into burnout, she came back, but she had to really work on establishing her identity outside of her job. She had never done that before. And it sounds like you had that. I had that early on in my career as well. And it's something we have to work on. It's something we have to learn, that we are not our jobs. So what she did is she started to understand what gave her life meaning. She started to dig into her passions and her values, not something she had ever done before. Again, because she was 7 by 24 all on. But what I shared with the students that I spoke with last month, I shared her story with them, and I said, what's really good is if you can start, and even if you're well into your career, spend a minimum. And this sounds r- not like much time at all, but spend a minimum of 30 minutes a week understanding what gives your life meaning, what your passions are, what your values are outside of your job. Because when you can help start to build your identity outside of your job, again, if you lose your job, it's like a death, it's like a complete death. So if you've built some of your identity outside of your job, then that's a buffer as you're going between jobs. Um, and I also say, I mean, you've heard your whole life, I've heard my whole life, uh, go do what you love, go do your passion. You won't work a day in your life. I don't buy it. It's Steve Jobs. He's probably more well known for that quote than just about any quote. I don't buy it. I spent 40 years in tech, and what I saw is, and I'm a natural artist. I would have gone into art if I would have followed my passion, but I knew, okay, no way I'm going to make a living in art. So many people that are able to follow their passion and do what they love, they have some wealth behind them somewhere. I don't know if it's family wealth but they have something to fall back on. I had nothing to fall back on. I worked multiple jobs. I worked my way through school. There was no family money. It's not something I could just decide I'm going to go off and become an artist. Um, so I say that because a lot of people that end up working 7 by 24 and they are their job, um, they haven't really developed their passions outside of their job, or if they have developed their passions outside of their job, and I said earlier I'm an artist, then they can find a way to bring their passions into the job that they have. And that's probably a lot more common where people are working to make a living, and it's not that they don't like their job, but if they can find a way to not only build their passion outside of their job, but weave their passion into their job, whatever it is. I tried to find a way to always weave creativity into tech. Then that also becomes a source of energy. But being your job is always a scary place to be because, again, jobs go away and they go away for mergers or acquisitions, change in business strategy. And you never want to be in that position where you don't have you haven't done the work to develop your identity and your passions and your values outside of work. And it doesn't take that long. I mean, 30 minutes a week. That just exploring those areas is also a source of energy. It gives you a source of energy as well in your day job.
Awesome. That's good stuff. And so, Lisa, I like to wrap up these conversations by going behind the dedication. And you dedicate your book to Larry, Shelby, and Cody, the sparks to my flame. Tell me who those people are and why it was important to dedicate the book to them.
Oh, that's wonderful. I didn't know you did that. My husband, my daughter, and my puppy. And we sadly lost our puppy suddenly after 10 years this last month. But our dog, who was this is just most amazing Australian Shepherd, was a complete, dedicated, loving member of our family. So I absolutely had to include Cody in the dedication of the book because what I say is they were all there. They encouraged me the whole way, and so did Cody the entire time. So that and I have an amazing husband, amazing daughter, and Cody will be with me in my heart forever.
I love that. I love that. Her name is Lisa Wolfe. She is the author of the Amazon and Barnes & Noble best-selling book, Inner Fire, Protecting Your Spirit from Corporate Burnout. Lisa, thanks so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Joe. And so great to meet you.
And that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to find out more information about Lisa and our other fine authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.